Hello to all college football fans watching this video. I'm Trent Rockford, better known as Trent's Tailgate, and welcome to my first YouTube video. It must be a privilege with my one subscriber, but gotta start somewhere, right? So yeah, welcome to my first video. If you want to know anything about me, like I said, I'm Trent Rockford. I'm a 19-year-old sophomore currently attending Southeastern Louisiana University with a sports communications degree. I know it's super exciting, very hard major. As you can see, I'm an LSU fan. 2019, great season. Hopefully we see some of that this year. We'll see. My plan for this YouTube channel is to just talk about college football. You know, I love it, and I just want to talk about it and express my love for it around YouTube. I know a lot of YouTubers do it and they love doing it. With my plan, how it's going to go is that on Mondays, I'm going to be talking about the rankings that will come out on Sundays, as well as looking at how the games went over that weekend. Wednesdays will be for like the Heisman's, conference looks, and then my predictions on some of the big games and just games in general. And then Thursday, since I am going to Southeastern, I'll have to interview the teams for some reports, and I just like to do it. So on Thursdays, if I do interviews, I'll post them on YouTube channel as well. And occasionally I might go to some games, so I'll keep it updated on if I do anything else, like if I can't do an interview, or if I'm going to any games, you'll get maybe an extra video. I know I'm going to the Tulane Ole Miss game during week 2, and I'll bring y'all with me when that happens. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Now enough of the talking. As I said, on Mondays, I usually want to talk about the top 25, comparing mine to the actual top 25. Now it might change around because there's a CFP which comes out on a different time, and the APs always come out on Sunday before the NFL games. So it might change around a little bit, but I know it's a Wednesday, so it sounds kind of weird, but I thought the polls were going to come out Wednesday, so I thought today would be the perfect video as the polls just come out. I got it wrong, they come out on Monday. But anyways, let's go and talk about the polls, and then we'll compare them to mine. Got it? Now overall, when we look at the top 25 for the AP poll, it's pretty solid all around. And then there's of course some usual weird teams, like maybe some teams that shouldn't be ranked and some teams that maybe should be ranked that are getting receiving votes. There's always those, so we'll go ahead and look at those. Starting with our top 4, it's been pretty standard across most people that this is a pretty agreeable top 4, with Georgia at the 1 taking most of the votes. And then you have Michigan and Ohio State at the 2 and 3. The big issue with a lot of people is Bama at 4. Now Bama, of course, they have Nick Saban. It's a great team. They're usually in and out, one of the best teams. But this seems like one of the weaker rosters they've had in years. So a lot of people are arguing if they really should be worth that top 4 spot, and are they a preseason playoff team? It's a big debate, and I'll express my opinion on that when I talk about my polls and comparing it to the AP. Outside the top 4, we have LSU at the 5. LSU at the 5 again is a weird one for a lot of people, as even though they think they're top 10, the roster returning means the inconsistencies are returning, possibly like when they lost to A&M, being ranked 5th in the country. However, with Jayden Daniels returning and showing what he could do against Florida, Ole Miss, and Bama, the sky's still the limit, as they could still win their division and possibly win the conference. Could they best Georgia? We don't know, we'll just have to see. Now USC at 6 has been a pretty standard ranking for them so far throughout all these polls, as they have Caleb Williams, who is arguably the best player in the country, most likely is. So as long as they have the Heisman winner, the sky's the limit for them. It's just about if they can get their revenge against Utah and get that playoff spot, and then that streak where Pac-12 teams have been making the playoffs a while. This is the year to do it, as of course they have the Heisman. With Penn State at 7, it's not exactly a ranking I agree or disagree with. I think it's a pretty good spot for them. It's always the issue with them is that they have always a lot of talent, but they can never get past Ohio State and Michigan, as they're in the same division. If this is the year they can finally do it and get back to that 2016 form where they always made the playoffs, then it'll be fun for them. But it's just so hard to do that when they got to play number 3 and 2 in the preseason every single year. You can imagine how tough that is, especially since Michigan's made the playoffs 2 years in a row and Ohio State's made the playoffs a lot since then too. I mean, they made it last year without even winning the Big Ten. So it just shows you how tough these 2 teams are. And I guess we'll just see if Penn State can beat them or not and make the playoffs. Now, a lot of people, including me, are very high on Florida State this year. So I agree with the AP ranking them 8th in the polls. They have a lot of talent returning, which includes Travis Hunter, of course. And with that team, they went 10 and 3, which included that 6-game win streak. There's a lot of potential for that playoff appearance that they haven't had in a long time, plus a possible ACC championship game. The big issue in the ACC is, of course, can they beat Clemson? And of course, their playoff hopes are really tied to that LSU game, as a week 1 loss could really hurt them. I think they can do it, of course, which sucks to say as an LSU fan. I think they can definitely make the playoffs. I think they can win the ACC, but we'll see. But I think they can definitely do it. Now, with Clemson ranked 9th, it brings up an interesting question. Is the Dabo dynasty dead? They haven't made the playoffs the last 2 years, and since Trevor Lawrence left, the quarterback has been their biggest issue, as their defense has been basically carrying them to those 10, 11 win seasons they had these last 2 years. They've still been good, but they haven't been where they really could. Maybe with Klubnik at quarterback, they can finally break through and make it back to the playoffs. Of course, it just comes down to, can they beat Florida State to keep control of the ACC? And then can they get those rematches against Notre Dame and South Carolina, which is for their playoff hopes? It's definitely up and down, but we'll just see if the dynasty is truly dead. And rounding off the top 10, we have Washington. Of course, the big thing for Washington is that Michael Penix is returning, who played amazing. He was a big part of their 7-win turnaround, going from 4-8 to 11-2 and almost making the Pac-12 championship, barring some weird tiebreakers that got Utah in. Again, the Pac-12 is surprisingly loaded though, so it's tough to see them really winning the Pac-12, as you got so many good teams like, of course, USC and Utah, and possibly Oregon State and Oregon being the dark horses. Now, they are ranked ahead of Utah, meaning that I guess a lot of people expect them to make it and play USC, but we'll just see. However, I do think they can be a good team and they can possibly make it to the championship game. Right outside the top 10 is Texas at 11. Now, of course, the big question for Texas every year is, are they back? Last year was kind of, and it showed a lot of potential as they went from 5-7 to 8-5, mainly with Quinn Ewers. Now, of course, that tough game that can really prove if they're worthy of being a playoff team and proving that they can win the Big 12 is Bama at Bama. If they can win that game, then they can show a lot of people that they really are back, possibly, especially with the Big 12 being a little weaker than normal. I definitely think they can win the Big 12, and if they beat Bama, it's hard to not pick them as a playoff team. Will it happen? I don't know. It's hard to beat Bama at Bryant-Denny, but we'll see. Now, Tennessee at 12 is a pick I see a lot of people arguing with. A lot of people think they should be ranked in the top 10. It's interesting to look at this team, as although they have a good bit of talent returning, it's hard to look at this team, especially when Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt are gone, which were your 2 best players, and they were the reason that they were so good, and definitely the reason they beat Bama. Again, they're playing Bama in Georgia this year, and it's going to be hard to beat Bama twice, and of course Georgia's right there. However, Joe Milton showed a lot of potential in that Orange Bowl against Clemson. I mean, he has a cannon. So we'll just see how that goes. I do think they'll be good, but not as good as last year. Now, with Notre Dame at 13, we see a team that started 1-3 last year and ended 9-4, which included those big wins against Clemson and South Carolina. With a lot of that roster returning, and including getting Sam Hartman in the transfer portal, this team seems to be possibly better from last year, and then Marcus Freeman proved that he could be a good coach in college football. The big thing for them, if they can be a dark horse playoff team, is the 3 top 10 teams on their schedule: Ohio State, USC, Clemson. They lost to Ohio State and USC last year, and if they want to make the playoffs, they can really only afford to lose one of those games. So, could they possibly win 2 of 3? Definitely. But we'll see, as usually Notre Dame tends to struggle with those ranked teams. But I actually do think they could do it, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if they were the dark horse playoff team this year, considering that their schedule looks difficult enough and they have the talent and the hotness going from last year. But we'll see. Utah being ranked 14th in the country is a pick I don't really agree with. Although Utah did lose some players, including their leading rusher and receiver, I still think with a quarterback like Cam Rising, who's one of the best in the country, they're still a top 10 team. Now, yes, the Pac-12 is a lot tougher, and they don't seem like they have the best roster anymore. But I think with Cam Rising, they can still make the Pac-12 title game. I still think they can win it. I don't think they have the playoff hype like they did last year. I still think they're going to be a good team, and they could still possibly make a New Year's 6. It's just hard to say with how loaded the Pac-12 is, of course, though. Now, with Oregon at 15, that's a ranking I agree with, because the big thing for them is mainly Bo Nix returning. It is huge for them, and it keeps them in that Pac-12 contention, especially with how tough it is. But man, it's really just Bo Nix carrying that crew, which he can definitely do. But again, like with Utah, the Pac-12 is loaded, so it's hard to see them making the Pac-12 title game. I don't think they're better than Utah, Washington, and USC, but who knows, maybe they can be a surprise to me, and maybe they can make the Pac-12 title game. We'll see. They do have Bo Nix, so just like with Utah with Cam Rising, it's just how good do they play? Can they win the games for them? I think they definitely can, but also I think they definitely can't. Behind Oregon is K-State at 16 by a pretty wide margin, 231 points. Now, a big reason for K-State being ranked pretty low, especially after winning the Big 12, is losing Deuce Vaughn and their leading receiver. Vaughn was most of their offense basically during that season, and was the only big play they had against Bama. And while they are losing him, they still do have Will Howard, who was a pretty good quarterback last year, and he was a big part of them still winning and going 10-4 even after Adrian Martinez got injured. Now, this team still has a good bit of talent, so I still think they can be good and they could possibly make the Big 12 title game again, but I don't think they have the ability to win it again, as I think Texas will just be a better team overall. But maybe they can prove me wrong, maybe they can be good again. We'll see. They still have Will Howard, like I said earlier, so we'll see. Now with the team most people expected to drop off, going all the way from 2 to 17, is TCU. It's crazy to see a team that went to the national title game drop 15 spots, but with them losing Max Duggan, Kendre Miller, and Quentin Johnston, the three best offensive players, it's so hard to see this team make the playoffs again and be as good as they were. It's probably a good reason why K-State's ranked ahead of them, as although K-State lost Deuce Vaughn, they lost way less than TCU did. Now, can TCU still make the Big 12 championship game? Definitely. They still have the talent, but can they repeat that magic and make the playoffs again? It's unlikely, but I don't know. They did it last year, so maybe this year won't be much of a surprise if they can do it, but I don't know. Oregon State was a surprise team last year, as they had a shocking 10-3 season, which included beating Oregon in the Civil War game. We see them back in the rankings at 18th with pretty similar expectations. The big thing for them is getting transferred DJ Uiagalelei, which is pretty bad to say he's an improvement, but the bad part for Oregon State was their lackluster quarterback play last year. Their leading quarterback didn't even have 1,500 passing yards. It's pretty bad, especially when you don't have a 1,000-yard rusher. They do have multiple talented running backs, which was the big part for them, and their defense, which was one of the better ones in the Pac-12, maybe the best one. It's really hard to grade this team, as the Pac-12 is loaded, and when you look at all the ranked teams, they look like probably the weakest one, but they could definitely be a dark horse for the Pac-12 title game. Again, it'll probably really come down to that Civil War game against Oregon to see if they have a shot to make the Pac-12 title game. I am optimistic though, as that quarterback improvement, even though it's little, could definitely be the thing that gets them to the top and possibly be a Pac-12 title contender. Wisconsin being ranked 19th is a pick I do agree with Luke Fickell coming over from Cincinnati, who had been one of the best coaches the last 5 years with them, which included getting Cincinnati to the playoffs as the first Group of 5 team, and them getting Tanner Mordecai at the transfer portal, who had been one of the best statistical quarterbacks last 2 years. I definitely can see why they deserve to be ranked. With Tanner Mordecai and running back Braylon Allen, who had been their best weapon and one of the best running backs in the country, I definitely think that they have the offense to finally get back to the Big Ten title game, which they haven't been to in a while, especially with how weak that division is, with a 8-4 Purdue team winning it. I mean, we'll just see how it goes, but I definitely think they have a good shot to win it with the coaching improvement and the possible quarterback improvement. One of the teams I don't think that should be ranked that are ranked is Oklahoma at 20. With them going 6-7 and their defense not being that good, especially with Brett Venables, who's usually been a great defensive coordinator, it's really hard to see why this team should be ranked, especially when you look at who they're losing. They're losing their leading rusher and receiver, and without your two best offensive players, on top of your lackluster defense and a weak recruiting class, I just don't see how you can really rank this team when really all they have left returning is Dylan Gabriel, maybe some solid offensive defensive players, but losing your leading rusher and receiver really hurts, and it's really interesting to see if this team is really worth that ranking or if they're going to fall off the ranking that they did last year. North Carolina being ranked 21 is primarily a ranking due to Drake May still being there. Drake May is a super talented quarterback, and I say he's the second best behind Caleb Williams. North Carolina has a relatively easy schedule outside of mainly South Carolina and Clemson, but those are really it. So it's hard to say that North Carolina won't make the ACC title game again, but it's hard to say they win it, because even though they have Drake May, who is the best quarterback in that conference in my opinion, they don't have enough all-around talent to beat Clemson and Florida State. But maybe they can pull an upset. Maybe Drake May is just that good and he can win the Heisman. We'll see how it goes. Ole Miss definitely has the talent to be ranked, which is why they're ranked 22nd in the country, as they're keeping Quinshon Judkins and then having a quarterback room with Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders, who are two really good quarterbacks, definitely shows that they have the talent to be a ranked team. The big question for them is that they lost their top two receivers, and that they probably have maybe the hardest schedule in college football, as they got 3 ranked road games against Tulane, Bama, and Georgia, and then they got to play LSU and A&M. So that's 5 ranked teams so far. So considering how this team started off 7-1 and ended 8-5, it's interesting to see how this team starts and ends. If they're going to be consistent all the way through, they're going to just struggle with these ranked teams, or maybe they can get some of those upsets and maybe be in Year 6 contention. It's interesting to see, but with an offense led by Lane Kiffin, it'll be interesting to see nonetheless. A&M is again one of those picks where, similar to Oklahoma, I don't see why they should be in the rankings. They had one of the most talented teams we have seen in recent college football, and they go 5-7 after being ranked like number 6. It's super hard to see this team being ranked at all when a lot of your recruits left, and you really don't have a lot of that talent from last year that made you a top 10 team to start with. Maybe they can turn it around, it'll be a solid team like they used to be, like going 8-4 or something like that. But it's super hard to see that when, like I said earlier, you have less talent than last year and you still went 5-7. After statistically the greatest turnaround in college football history, Tulane finds themselves to rank 24th in the polls, being the first time ever being ranked in the preseason. The big thing for them is Michael Pratt is still there, who is considered by many a top 10 to 15 quarterback in college football, as well as a pretty solid recruiting class for them, with a good bit of returning players on the defense and receiving core. The big game for them to really prove if they're ready for another New Year's 6 run will be if they can beat Ole Miss. Outside of that, the schedule is relatively easy, outside of UTSA to end the season off, which will probably decide who has the home field advantage in the American title game. I think Tulane is definitely the team to get back to a New Year's 6, but we'll see as the season goes on. Rounding off the AP Top 25 is Iowa 25. Now Iowa, a lot of people kind of saw how terrible their offense was, which was their downfall, because their defense was amazing, led by Jack Campbell, but that offense was terrible. They scored 7 points against an FCS school without scoring a single touchdown. So them being ranked is a pretty questionable call, especially when they lost Jack Campbell, who was their best player. Now a lot of their players are returning outside of him, so there's potential, but it's super hard to see that offense really have that much of an improvement to really be in consideration for a championship spot, when I think Wisconsin and Purdue or Minnesota are better teams across the board. And that wraps up the AP Top 25. Overall, I think it's a pretty solid ranking. The only picks I really disagree with are Oklahoma and A&M being ranked. I really think teams like South Carolina and Texas Tech should be ranked ahead of them, as they have just way more upside, and in my opinion, more talent than those teams do going into this season. But with that, we'll compare the AP poll to my poll, and y'all can decide what poll y'all think is better. Now, starting with the top 4, mine is the exact same, and no, I did not copy the polls. I made my poll a few days ahead of the AP poll, and that's what I will do. So, starting it off with the top 4, mine is the exact same. I have Georgia at 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, and Bama 4. Now, although I said earlier that Bama at 4 is an argument that a lot of people are having, I think that they're a top 4 team, as y'all probably gonna hate me for saying it, but it's Bama. They have Nick Saban. it's hard to really see this team not be a consistent playoff team, and much less outside the top 6 or 5. Now, while I might think that LSU is better than them, like I said, it's still Bama. They're always going to be a top team consistently. Now, for my polls, that's where most of the similarities end. As a number 5, I have USC ranked ahead of LSU, where I have them ranked at 6th. To me, USC just has more talent and overall just a better quarterback. Caleb Williams is definitely a better quarterback than Jayden Daniels, and I think USC has more upside and talent going into this year. As to me, that inconsistency problem affects LSU more than I think it affects USC. So I just think going to this year that USC will probably be a better team going into it, but we'll see. Now when it comes to that 7 and 8 spot, I have Florida State and Clemson ranked at those spots. Like I said, I think Florida State is definitely the better team, and I think they will probably win the ACC. And Clemson's right behind them, as it's very tight to say who can win those. But I personally think Florida State is better and can win it. And also, I think those two just have more upside at Penn State. I have Penn State ranked 9th below them, as I just think Florida State and Clemson have better rosters, and they definitely both have playoff aspirations. As for Penn State, it's hard to see them do that when they have to play both Michigan and Ohio State. So I just think with the less upside and less talent, it's only fair that I rank Penn State underneath those two ACC powerhouses. And then rounding off my top 10, I have Utah. Like I said earlier, I don't agree with them being ranked 14th. I think with Cam Rising and still some returning talent, I still think that they're a prime team to win the Pac-12 again, and they're still the second best team in the Pac-12 behind USC, maybe even the best team. I am still pretty high on Utah, maybe not as high as I was last year, as I thought they were going to be a playoff team. I think those aspirations are a little lower, but I still think that they're a top 10 team across the board with their roster and their quarterback. Just like the AP poll, I do have Texas ranked 11th, as Texas is a very young team with a lot of potential and a lot of talent. However, with that youth, it's really hard to rank this team into the top 10. So I think them being a borderline top 10 team is right. Now, of course, if they beat Bama, then I immediately will think that they're a playoff team and that Texas truly is back. But that question will still be there until they play Bama, and then we'll see how they play. But right now, I think 11 is the ideal spot for them, as they definitely have the talent to be right there. I do have Notre Dame ranked one spot higher at 12, and as like I said earlier, I do think that they could be a dark horse playoff team. It's of course just Ohio State, USC, and Clemson, those 3 tough games that really decide their playoff chances. But I do think they're a little bit better than the polls give them, so that's why I gave them just that one extra spot at 12. I know, it's a huge difference. Now for me, I don't have Washington ranked in the top 10. I do have them ranked 13th. And that's mainly because I don't think their roster stacks up to the teams that are right outside of 2, like Texas and Notre Dame. Now sure, Washington definitely has a better quarterback than those 2 teams. As going through this, I would definitely rank Michael Penix over Sam Hartman and Quinn Ewers. However, like I said earlier, I just don't think the rosters compare. I think Texas and Notre Dame have way better rosters and just far more upside than Washington, as Washington is just stuck playing in a really competitive Pac-12, where I think Utah and USC are the 2 best teams in that conference. For me, I have Tennessee ranked 14th. Now the reason for that is I do think that Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt were big impact players that I think could really affect Tennessee's season going forward. Now I do think Joe Milton can keep this team afloat. I think they can definitely go 10-2, 9-3, but I don't think they're going to be as close to making the playoffs this year as they were last year with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt, just because I think those losses were so big for them. For me, I have TCU ranked 15th, and although they are losing a lot of talent, like I said earlier with Max Duggan, Kendra Miller, and Quentin Johnston, they still made the playoffs, and I still think it could be a good team. I do think 17 is a little too harsh for them, so I think basically right there at 15, a top 15 team is perfect for them, especially for a team that had just made the playoffs last year, as I think Sonny Dykes has a lot of potential to get this team back to the Big 12 title game, because I do think that they're still a very solid team. We'll just see if those 3 losses really affect them as much as the polls think. I do have Oregon ranked 1 spot lower in the polls. I have them ranked 16th compared to 15th in the polls, as it's not a huge gap, but I do think them being ranked ahead of TCU, I don't agree with that, as I don't think just Bo Nix is enough to really say that they're better than a team that just made the playoffs last year. And even though TCU lost a bunch of that talent, like I said, they made the playoffs. they should still be a very consistent team that is in the New Year's Six hunt. While Oregon is just such a weird team to look at, as they kind of fell apart losing to Washington and Oregon State to end the year off. One of the reasons I'm so surprised with South Carolina not being ranked in the polls is because I have them ranked 17th in my polls, which is definitely a big stretch when you go from unranked in the AP to 17th in mine. But the reason I think that it should be ranked right there is because outside of Georgia and maybe Tennessee, most of those games are pretty winnable. I wouldn't be too surprised if South Carolina was a 10-win team. It really does all rely on Spencer Rattler if he can really improve. And if he plays like he did in the last 3 games for a full season consistently, then they can truly be dangerous. But I'm not saying they're going to win the SEC East because I don't think they can beat Georgia. But they can definitely beat Tennessee and any of those other teams in the SEC East and their West teams like A&M. Oregon State being ranked 18th is a ranking that both the AP and my ranking have in common. Again, I think 18th is about a fair expectation for them. They have about a middle-of-the-road roster considering where all the ranked teams are in the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 looks to be really good this year. Now with Uiagalelei there, I do think that is a quarterback improvement. However, them going anything better than 10-3 is a stretch to say because just the Pac-12 is so strong. And when you look at all those really good teams, their roster is one of the worst ones, or maybe a middle-of-the-road roster when you compare all those ranked teams. So I think 18th is a good spot for them. I do have K-State ranked lower in my polls as I have them ranked 19th compared to 16th in the AP. My main reason for that is that I do think Deuce Vaughn is a huge loss for them. And that can definitely hurt their chances of making it back to another New Year's Six bowl game. Especially with how it ended against Bama, it just doesn't look too promising for them, as we can just see when they play some of those really good teams outside of maybe TCU, we really see how much they could have struggled, and I don't think that they can really have that magic again, which is why I do have them ranked below TCU and at 19th instead of 16th. I do have Wisconsin ranked one spot lower at 20th compared to 19th, which isn't that huge of a difference because there's really not much else I can really say. Like I said, similar to what I said before, they have Luke Fickell, they have Tanner Mordecai. However, I do think South Carolina is a better team than them, which is why some of these teams would have similar rankings and are really only just one spot lower because I think South Carolina deserves to be a ranked team and are ranked ahead of some of these teams. Back to another similarity I have with the polls is that I have North Carolina ranked 21st. Again, the big thing for them is just they have Drake May, who's a top 2 quarterback. I already went in depth on this with my look at the AP poll, so there's really nothing else I can say. It really is just Drake May keeping that team in the rankings. Now, I do have Texas Tech ranked in my polls at 22nd. The reason for that is I think there's a lot of upside for this team. This team had a 4-game win streak to end the season off to end 8-5, which included that bowl win over Ole Miss, which was a pretty impressive win as they won by 17. A lot of that roster is returning from last year, so I do think they can definitely be one of those dark horse Big 12 teams. However, it's definitely hard to say they can win it or make the conference title game because Texas, TCU, and K-State are right there. But I definitely think Texas Tech could be a dark horse, and I wouldn't be too surprised if they made the Big 12 title game. Behind Texas Tech, I have Tulane ranked 23rd, one spot higher than they were in the AP poll, and then behind Tulane, I have Ole Miss at 24th. My reason for this is that I think Tulane just has more upside and has a slightly better roster than Ole Miss. We'll see when they play each other, but my big reason is that even though Tulane did lose Tajay and some solid defensive players, so did Ole Miss, and I think Ole Miss losing their 2 best receivers is a big loss for them because it really hurts their passing game when they don't have a quarterback better than Michael Pratt, in my opinion, because Michael Pratt's considered by many a top 10 to 15. So that's why I have Tulane ranked ahead of Ole Miss and also a little bit higher than they were in the actual polls. Rounding off my top 25, I have Boise State ranked 25th. Now that might come as a surprise to some people. My reason for ranking them is I think Boise State has finally found their quarterback to lead them back to those New Year's Six games. Taylor Green came out of nowhere and helped turn around a struggling Boise State team into a 10-win team and getting them to the conference title game. They do play Washington week 1, which is a real test for them to really prove if they're worthy of being a New Year's Six team, but I definitely think with Taylor Green, they can definitely compete with Tulane for that New Year's Six spot as a Group of 5 team. And with that, that concludes my comparison of my top 25 to the AP. When the college football season starts, I'll be doing these videos on Monday. For the next week, while they're still into football, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post videos of who I think is going to win all the conferences, and how I think these teams will do with these schedules, and just overall who I think could be some possible playoff teams, New Year's Six teams, and all that. So thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next week when I start posting those prediction videos.